Dr. Lance Forshee serves as an associate professor of anatomy at Alice Walton School of Medicine. In this role, he's the course director for Phase 1 Structure and Function and Phase 2 Skin and Musculoskeletal Blocks. He also leads efforts to include AI in the medical curriculum at the school. Prior to joining the school, Dr. Forshee held the position of assistant professor at Arkansas College of Osteopathic Medicine, as well as an assistant professor of biology at Southern Utah University. A native of Oklahoma, Dr. Forshee received his bachelor's in biology at East Central University and his PhD in integrative biology at Oklahoma State. Dr. Forshee is a member of the International Association of Medical Science Educators, the American Association of Clinical Anatomists, and the American Association for Anatomy. He contributes to medical research as a reviewer of several journals, including Medical Science Educator. Please welcome Dr. Forshee.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, once again, everyone, thank you all for letting me come and chat with you all today. My name is Lance Forshee, and a lot of you all might be wondering why in the heck you've got an anatomist up here chatting with you. And I wonder to myself sometimes the same thing, like why is it that I got into this area? And twofold reason, folks, I have a lot of interest in artificial intelligence, like you mentioned. I think it's pretty cool. And second reason is that one day my dean came down and said, hey, I need you to figure out every possible way to make this happen in our curriculum. And so that's what I've been dedicating the last year to, is everything we do at our school to make sure that we can get that infused into our curriculum. So, there we are. Here's where we are today. First thing I'd like to kind of preface this with is I'm an educator at heart, as you've heard. I've taught undergrad, I've taught osteopathic students, teaching MD students as well soon, and I cannot help myself. I need some interaction, I need something, or I'm just gonna kind of stand up here very awkwardly and it's gonna be a weird 30 minutes for both of us. So if I ask you to raise your hand or something, please humor me. I promise I won't throw anything as long as you don't throw anything back, so we can agree to that. Now, what in the heck am I talking about today? I feel like we need to level set with this. There is a lot going on in AI right now. And I got an email just this morning that was showing me 3 to 4 new studies that have just been published about artificial intelligence within medicine. So if I were to stand up here and talk to you about all of these innovations, I would have someone sitting right here with a printer just handing me pieces of paper as stuff is published, and I imagine folks would like to go home sometime Friday afternoon. So we don't necessarily want us to do that. So what I've identified is some places where you may or may not know that artificial intelligence is already working for you in healthcare, and level set with AI, also figure out where's it going, like how do we get physicians to make sure that they can be the best physician they can be utilizing artificial intelligence. I'd also like to talk a little bit about some ethical considerations and policy. This is a very hot button issue right now. You've got folks who want to come up with policies for everything, and I know there are students in the audience, so can you imagine a scenario where there are so many policies that you can never touch AI? Or all of this, I mean, imagine now what faculty are probably running everything that you submit through Turnitin, through some kind of AI detector, through whatever else they can find on the internet just to make sure that you're not asking ChatGPT a question. But I'm not necessarily sure that that's the right approach. And then finally, I'm really excited to talk a little bit about Q&A, some of the ethical considerations I think we'll have a good chat about. So, I'd like to talk about what AI isn't first. And I would like to preface this with saying that I tend to be really, really good friends with my grandmother-in-law. And we call her affectionately Nana. Love Nana to death. She's a fantastic woman. She called me yesterday, and she asked me if I was excited to come chat with you all. And I said, yeah, you bet. You bet. And she said, well, what are you chatting about? And I said, artificial intelligence and medicine, Nana. She goes, oh, boy. I'm terrified of that. And I was like, that's a pretty specific thing to be terrified of. Can you give me some more information? And she says, well, I'm really scared as an 88-year-old woman of the things that I'm missing out on. What am I not doing? Because it's really late in my life to learn how to use this. It's really late in my life to try to figure out how to make it better. So I feel like I'm missing out on this huge wave of technology that's sweeping across the country. And I had to tell her that you're really not missing out on it. And I just showed her some ways that things were already happening, that she'd already used it, and she was really excited about it. So the first thing I'd like to point out is AI is not scary, much like Nana thinks it is. AI is not this terrifying thing that you should be afraid of. It's a tool that we should be using. AI is also not going to come take your job. This is something that I find really, really interesting that a lot of folks will come up and say is that we can't do this as a teacher because eventually AI will just sit in front of the students and they'll teach the students. And I'm just trying to figure out how the heck that would work. I feel like the conversation around artificial intelligence right now is centered around the same conversation when the internet came out. And I don't know if anybody remembers this, but it was like, the internet's coming out, everything's gonna be ruined. The encyclopedia salesmen, they're going down the drain, right? And I remember as a kid, them coming to my house, selling us these encyclopedias with the blue on the spine, and it was so cool because that was my first introduction to the world, is getting these encyclopedia volumes. And then one day, they stopped coming. And I started going online and started searching, and then Wikipedia became a thing, and all of these large repositories. So artificial intelligence is not gonna come take your job unless you fail to adapt alongside of it. Remember, if a new tool exists, you need to make sure you figure out ways to use it, and artificial intelligence is just one of those things. Finally, artificial intelligence is not Skynet. And for those of you who know what this reference is, I'm happy you laughed. I see 3 faces out there that are smiling right now. The rest of you, this is the thing in Terminator movies that they were all afraid of. This isn't some omnipotent being that's gonna come through and sweep through humanity and take us all out, or whatever it is that happened in Terminator. This is a tool. And this is a tool that we use a lot of phrasing around, so I'd like to level set with talking about what AI actually is. Artificial intelligence is this huge umbrella of topics. And there are more and more things added under that umbrella every day. Much like if we think about biology as this huge umbrella of topics, and there's all these subspecialties of biologists, there are subspecialties of artificial intelligence. Now, if you are a data scientist out in the audience and you're sitting here thinking like, I'm not sure I get this or agree with this, understand I'm yet a humble anatomist talking about artificial intelligence. So keep your tomatoes in your pocket. Now, what I'd like to point out here is that if you look out online and you look at all of the different kind of domains or pillars of artificial intelligence, these 6 things come up pretty frequently. And some of you might have seen some of these things, but I guarantee you, you have interacted with all of these things, not in just the last couple of years, but at least for the last 20 years. You have interacted with all of these things. So if you think of machine learning, I really want you to just think it's learning data patterns. Okay, you put data in, it looks at patterns, it spits something out. I drove up from Northwest Arkansas this morning, and driving around that area always blows me away because the houses are gigantic in some parts, and I just sit there and I'm like, wow, that's insane. And I start thinking about land values. So when we think of machine learning, we could take all the data from all the sales of the land within Northwest Arkansas, put it into a machine learning algorithm, and it would be able to spit out and predict land costs for us. That's why we use that. If we have information that we want to throw into something called natural language processing, well, this is basically just wanting to understand and manipulate human language. You all have dealt with this probably more frequently than anything. If you get an email from a professor that you don't like, you know you can filter that name, right? And it just goes straight to the trash. I don't recommend that you do it, but it's possible. The same thing if you go shopping at the shoe store down the road and you type your email in for the 10% discount and then they bombard you with emails, eventually they get filtered off somewhere else. So natural language processing, that's where that's happening. Neural networks, this is a kind of machine learning. It's quite strange in that it's set up kind of like your brain. So if you know anything about biology, we're talking axons and dendrites and cell bodies. They use words like nodes in this, and essentially they're passing information through nodes to make some kind of determination within an algorithm. You're gonna see this a lot in Wi-Fi optimization. So for example, a neural network could be used to optimize Wi-Fi to shift packets over to this area because we know that a bunch of people are going to be in this auditorium today on their cell phones or on their laptops connecting to the Wi-Fi. So an institution could use this to shift resources to places where they know heavy use is going to occur. And then this afternoon, that neural network can help figure out how to shift it back. Deep learning is just a more complex version of neural networks. So once you pass a certain number of layers of nodes, it turns into deep learning. That's really all it comes down to. You just get more complex neural networks, eventually deep learning. How does that work? This is what you see in autonomous cars. This is like something that Tesla's gonna be running on because it's taking in tons and tons and tons of information constantly. We're talking about terabytes to petabytes of information, and it's making some kind of determination on it. The next one, computer vision. I love this one because this is what takes images and videos and helps you recognize objects and people within them. So there is a program out there called Orange, and I know some folks use it. It's got this really cool ability where one of the examples of it is it's an artificial-based intelligence program that it says, if you dump enough pictures of ducks into this program, it will be able to identify a duck in any picture possible. And if you put pictures of geese alongside the pictures of ducks, then it will be able to eventually determine the difference between a goose and a duck. So this is how your car, if you have one of those self-driving cars, determines small child from traffic cone, is that it looks at the differences in the characteristics of what it's seeing, spits something else out. Finally, cognitive computing. Some folks say that this is kind of like a marketing term. So this was developed to try to make artificial intelligence more like popular and attractive. Okay. Other folks say that they're getting an actual degree in this. So if you think cognitive computing, this is where we want to simulate human thought processes. Think IBM Watson. You're going to have a human actually interacting with this. It's going to be chatting back and forth with it. This is not ChatGPT. This is something on a whole nother level. ChatGPT exists more down machine learning, more natural language processing than it does on any of these higher scales, okay? So, what about artificial intelligence in medicine? We got all these things. Where in the heck is it happening? Like I mentioned, there's a lot going on. So what I'd like to do is point out somewhere that has had a ton of research going on, and that would be liver transplants. And that feels very random, but the cool part about liver transplants is that since 1999, there have been a litany of papers published across a number of topics within liver transplant. So you've had 8 papers on graft allocations, steatosis assessment, liver segmentations, waitlist mortalities. We've had 18 papers on patient outcome and predictions, post-transplant, 7 on the predictions of graft rejection, and 19 on post-transplant comorbidity. And if you notice in the parentheses by there, those years that are in parentheses indicate the first year something on that topic was published. So in 1999, we were already trying to use artificial intelligence algorithms to predict some of the post-transplant comorbidity and complications. And the interesting part about this is a lot of these papers started out basically saying, can the AI do something as good as us? And the overwhelming response to that was definitely not. It has very little predictive value. It stinks. Why are we even using this? And that started at 1999. And as time progressed, things got more complex. If you notice down at the bottom, 1999 it's a broad topic, talking about transplant comorbidity complications. There could be any number of complications with a transplant. And then as time progressed, these things got more and more complex, all the way into the point to where we can start looking at graft allocation. We can start looking at who gets it, why did they get it, how can we predict that? And to me, that's a little scary, isn't it? That if I think about taking all of my patient information, I plug it into some black box, and then out comes the likelihood that this liver is going to work for me, that could be potentially terrifying. So let's look at 3 different studies where they actually are using artificial intelligence to make big choices. So A, up in the top left corner, you take some hepatocellular carcinoma patient information, you run it through what they call a random forest model. It's a pretty simple artificial intelligence algorithm that kind of just makes choices. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. You run it through this, and out comes this 3, 6, and 12-month waitlist mortality issue, where it basically tells you what's the likelihood that if you're on a 3-month wait list, a 6-month wait list, or a 12-month, that you will survive. So you've got information going in, something happens, and then out comes this prediction of this likelihood. Additionally, you've got another study with B. In that green outline is the actual liver that was being harvested, and that was a smartphone that took that picture. There exists an algorithm where I can take a picture of that liver as I harvest it with my smartphone. It will run it through a neural network, extract some of the features behind it, and tell me the quality of the organ. And then tell me who would be the best person to receive that organ. All from a smartphone picture. Now, first thing, I have a problem with a surgeon in the middle of a surgery while they're harvesting this liver, kind of popping out their iPhone and being like, To me, that seems a bit strange, but this is real-time, quick information. This is happening as they're doing it. We can get a little bit more complex and we can say that we can take donor and recipient information in study C, we can plug that into the algorithm or into a neural network, and out will come the best likelihood or the best possible person for your donation, or the best possible person that you should receive a donation from. So we can match, essentially, donors with recipients based on a whole host of information to figure out who is going to have the best likelihood of survival post-transplant, and also who's going to have the best likelihood of making this work out long-term. So not just will they survive, but will they survive many years? And here comes my question. Do we feel comfortable with that? Like, does that feel good to plug your info into this black box and then out comes something that basically tells me, yes or no, I can get this? Because there's an ethical dilemma. Imagine someone's been on the wait list 6 months. Someone hops on the wait list for 1 week. Right now, wait list time determines your spot on the list typically, plus some other factors. But I can imagine a scenario where someone's on 6 months, someone's on 1 week, and the person who's been on 1 week is a much better predicted match for a liver than the person who's been on 6 months. Maybe it's 98% for one, 97% for the other. Who gets the liver? So I'd love to see a show of hands. How confident are we in that choice? Anybody in here extremely confident with that outcome? Like if you were to plug all your info in there and it pops out, you're like, yep, I feel good about that. Love that, love that. How about medium confidence? Like, I could be okay with it. Okay, that's reasonable. There's some more of you. How many of you feel like this is the worst possible thing that could happen and you just want to hear it from a physician and not the algorithm? Yeah, that's more of what I expected, in that we still like that personal touch because we're not sure, even as a community who's been using computers now for decades, that if we really trust what's coming out of this, we'd much rather have the doc sit in front of us and tell us, look, you've been on for a while, something came up, but you're not quite a good match. I don't want to know that I'm 97% to their 98%. Because I'm going to start asking some bigger questions about my provider. Instead, we want to try to figure out how can we increase our confidence, or does confidence even matter in this setting? So let's look at this other study that I identified. It just came out a couple months ago in Nature Communications. This is a picture of a skin lesion. And this skin lesion is something that dermatologists will look at to make a diagnosis on, particularly diagnosis of melanoma. So if you look at the skin lesion, there's going to be things that identify and kind of lead this to think that, yeah, we probably should get a biopsy of this because it's got characteristics that indicate that this could be potential melanoma. Now, if you know anything about artificial intelligence, when you can identify set characteristics and continue to put them into a box, well, this is the perfect thing to plug into something like that. And that's exactly what happened in this study. They trained an algorithm to look at these different pieces and to be able to predict, is a lesion that they see melanoma or not. And they're even as far as to go as to compare the outcome of a physician's diagnosis versus the artificial intelligence diagnosis. So is one better than the other? However, a lot of the physicians were pretty upset with that, rightly so. I don't want to be compared to a computer. As a teacher, I don't want to be compared to a computer. So what they ended up doing is they ended up saying, well, let's look at how confident physicians are with this, without it. Does it actually even change their ability to diagnose? And what they found was that physicians actually became way more confident in their own diagnosis when they had an artificial intelligence backing them up, and even more confident when they got this little piece right here, when the artificial intelligence explained its reasoning. So I think back to our liver question. Would I feel confident getting that information out if it came with a brief explanation? And at least in the case of the physicians in using this to make diagnosis, yes. So what we see here is we see an accuracy graph on the very far left. This is a physician's accuracy in diagnosing skin lesions as melanomas with no AI, with AI support, and then XAI support. And when we say XAI support, think of that as AI with an explanation. So it comes out and it says, this is melanoma for these reasons. And what we see here is that physicians were right at about 63% accurate in diagnosing lesions as melanoma with no artificial intelligence. Come in artificial intelligence support, it jumps up to about 72, 73%, and that is a significant shift. And when they got the explanation, they actually jumped up to about 73%-ish successful, so it's no real significant difference. So we can see that even with AI support, even if the physician's not super confident in it, it does in fact increase their diagnosis accuracy for this, which I think is kind of wild. The next piece here is a physician's confidence in their own diagnosis. And you can see here very clearly that with no AI, a physician sits at around, it's about a 6.6. When they get AI support, it jumps up to about a 7.5. And when they get AI support with an explanation, it jumps up to a 7.8, which in all of these cases is a significantly different shift. So now we're getting physicians who are more confident in themselves. So they're more accurate, they're more confident, and they actually trust artificial intelligence more when they get that explanation. So we've got physicians that are going to be more accurate, more confident, and more trusting in the software. Now, it's not infallible. And I say that because you remember the two pictures I showed you at the beginning with the people afraid of AI? Those are AI generated, spoiler. Like, I'm pretty sure we all knew that. But the funny thing about it is that when I typed it into AI, I typed in the following prompt: generate an image showing humans afraid of AI. And it said, I can't do that, Lance. And for those of you who know Space Odyssey, 2000 or whatever, it's, I can't do that, Dave. It said the exact same thing to me, and I was like, oh. And then I started fiddling with it, and I started saying, well, generate me a picture of humans afraid of robots. And it was like, yes, of course. And then I said, well, generate me pictures of humans afraid of robots with the letters AI written on the chest of the robot. Bang, spit it right out. So it did the thing I wanted it to do. I just had to generate a prompt to get around it. That's where we are right now with artificial intelligence. That's why a lot of folks are being hired as English majors to work at tech companies, because they're writing things, figuring out how to write things in a particular way to put it into the algorithm so that it'll spit out something that they want. In this case, you see here, these gray lines in these images, by the way, those are individual physicians and how they changed over the phases of this. So if you look on the far left here, the no AI, right down at the bottom, you see that little black dot under? That's a physician who was most literally about 38% accurate in diagnosing skin melanomas. And when they got the AI support, they actually went down. And then when they got the explanation, they went up. So that tells me that they probably need some more professional development training on how to identify melanomas. The other piece is that the confidence, there's a physician who was fairly confident in their own diagnosis with no AI, but once the AI came in, they lost all their confidence. And then once they got the explanation, they became more confident again. So not only is this showing us that in general physicians do, but it's also showing us that we provide the reasoning why we'll get some really cool stuff. Now, most of you are probably not, I hope, going to have to deal with liver transplants or melanomas in your lifetime. I hope that's not the case. So where would you encounter this? This is small, might be small HIPAA violation, but forgive me. I'm going to assume everyone in here has been to the physician in the last couple of years. If not, please go get your physical checkups, your yearlies. It's important you keep up with those things. But if you have, how many of you have been asked to download the app? And the physician shows up and they're like, yeah, Mitt, download our app, it's fine. Yeah, I've seen some hands out there, it's fantastic. It's great. On your phone, you get this app, and all of your test results come straight to you. And you can even message the doc. Is that not cool? You get instant access to physicians. And one of the electronic health record systems, Epic, is doing a really cool thing with generative AI. Now, this is the AI that makes things when you ask it to do something, okay? So, in generative AI, you send that message to the doc through the app, guess what happens? The doc gets it, and they can now, within Epic, use generative AI to write a message back to you based on the content of the message. So here you see George reaching out and saying, hey, I just got a new granddaughter, and I'm worried that they're going to get me sick because I've got some heart complications. And so the AI is able to write a message back, get it back to George, no problem. Additionally, one of the most time-consuming pieces of being a physician is preparing for a consult. You got to read through the notes, you got to read through all the tests and the studies, see what's been done. With an Epic, it will actually summarize all of the notes into a short blurb for a physician to get ready to go in and do a consult. So now docs are not only talking back and forth to you via AI, but they're also preparing to see you using AI. Now, that's not all docs, obviously, and they also have to curate the message before it sends. You're not just talking to a robot. They actually have to approve what's being sent. So don't worry just yet. They're not that confident in the AI that they're just going to let it chat with you. So we've still got some time. But that brings up a really great question of, if we've got all these things available, and we have all of this stuff happening, how do we get people ready to use it? You can already see that when I had folks raise their hands about how many are confident in this coming out of the machine, a majority of you were like, I have no confidence in this whatsoever. I just want it to make cat pictures for me that I can post online. I'm okay with that. So how do we get people there? I argue that it has to start with physician training. And that makes sense. I mean, I'm a medical educator at a medical school. Of course, that's what I want to do, is train future physicians how to use artificial intelligence to be good future physicians. So when did this start? It started right at about 2018 with the American Medical Association, who came out with a policy about what they called at the time augmented intelligence, which basically artificial intelligence now. And they identified some pillars that they need to stand on as in training. So my students out here, these are the things that if you want to be a physician, the American Medical Association says that we need to take into account to make sure that you're ready to be a doc. So they want to make sure that they encourage priority setting. They don't want people just wildly identifying all this kind of stuff. They want to be very focused. They want to make sure that we integrate physicians' perspective. We don't want to develop artificial intelligence with absolutely no feedback whatsoever from physicians. These are the folks that are going to use it. So why would we not have that kind of feedback system? We want to make sure that we educate them on the promises and limitations, i.e., make me something that makes people afraid of AI, or show people afraid of a robot with AI printed on their chest. That is a true limitation here. And if you have tried yet, if anyone can, I've been trying to get it to generate a person with gout in their foot for the last 3 months, and it is not happening. They really want people to have 4 toes. So they also want to look at legal implications. One of the things that we often forget about here is if I dump a bunch of patient information to an algorithm to train it, where does that information go? And have you as the patient consented to doing that with your information? You know, I don't want to get into the Henrietta Lacks discussion, but I mean, that's where we're at with this. Can someone's information truly lead to big shifts in the way that we do this, which ultimately can be monetized on? It's possible. So how do we figure that out? So what did people do? Medical schools started doing some cool stuff in their curriculum. University of Florida College of Medicine sat down and actually did a ton of professional development with their faculty, because they said the way that they're going to get students to use artificial intelligence is by putting it into their research, and then medical students doing research with them. So they showed them all the ways that they can do this with professional development. The Illinois College of Medicine actually developed an AI in medicine certificate for their students as an elective. So they sat down and they said, hey, here's the certificate you can take. When you graduate, you can go to residency directors, future jobs, et cetera, and say, I have a certificate in this. I know how to use this. Harvard, they threw out student interest groups. Now, some of you might be thinking like, well, that's Harvard. Why can't they do more? Harvard's curriculum is intense, and there's a lot going on. And so student interest groups is a really great entry point for them. What that means is that there's no formal curriculum. They just support students who are really interested to go do more with it. And Harvard students tend to go off and do things like that anyway, so if you give them the leeway, they're going to take it and run with it. And also, I mean, I don't know about this place, but this place is integrating AI throughout learning objectives, down into sessions, as well as within lab settings, so within anatomy lab, and even with our clinical skills settings as well. So we've got these things integrated all the way down to when I talk to you about liver, one of our objectives to get out of that is recognize and identify mechanisms that artificial intelligence is being used in liver treatment, which I think is pretty cool. Now, assessments, this is also really cool. Faculty out here, I know there are probably some of you in the room. How many of you gone to ChatGPT and said, please write me a question about blank? And whatever blank is, that's what it is. I've done the same thing. I promise you, it does okay. It does so okay, in fact, that a paper published just this last year indicated that as far as difficulty ratings go, you can just about get similar difficulty ratings with a multiple choice question when you put it into ChatGPT and ask it to create one, or any other generative AI at this point. However, what it can't do is have matched discriminatory power. Basically what that means is that how do you know the students are getting the questions wrong for the right reasons? So they picked B because they have this belief instead of C because C is the right answer and this belief. So it doesn't have the same discriminatory power, meaning the distractors it picks kind of stink. So much so that about 60% of the time to 57% of the time, students were able to identify that's definitely something that was AI generated on an exam during a medical school level exam, which I think is pretty cool. However, there is this big quote here, and what I want you to get away from this big quote, because I did not want to mince words here, is the National Board of Medical Examiners, the NBME, are the people who basically write the boards, Step 1, Step 2, or COMLEX 1 and 2, and when you look at this, they are already using generative AI to develop questions for the boards. They are also using AI to score free response questions, and they are 98% accurate in scoring free response questions with artificial intelligence. They are 96% accurate at scoring patient notes with artificial intelligence, which means people in this room, when you go to medical school and take Step 1 in the coming years, most likely there will be multiple short answer questions on there. They're calling them sharp questions, just by the way. There will be them on there, so MCQs are even going out the window. It used to be that in medical school you could take tons and tons and tons of questions and be ready for the boards. Now it wants your reasoning. It wants to know why you did something, why you wouldn't do something else. And I think that's going to lead to a good change in the quality of the physicians that we're producing. Even admissions, even when you apply to medical school nowadays, guess what, folks? It's there. So if you think about a typical MD granting institution, they expect right at about 10,000 quality applicants a year. So if you're applying to an MD school, that's what they expect to get. And someone has to go through every single application and identify mechanisms that could or could not put you into the will interview or won't interview categories. So in this case, some folks are trying to use this to take that 10,000 down to 3,000. It reduces person hours, it reduces costs of going through all this, and also makes it to where we can review more people. However, the problem with AI is that you gotta have a ton of data to put in to train it, and 1 year is an N of 1 for this. So you need years and years and years and years of data to make really good predictions about this. So you might be thinking that no one's done it, but as it turns out, NYU's Grossman School of Medicine is using AI 100% as their primary admission mechanism. As in, if I get a secondary application, which basically is the med school's interested in you and they want to know more, when I submit that AI is making that decision within like an hour and telling you whether or not you're going to get an interview. So no longer are you submitting things and waiting a couple of weeks, you're submitting things and waiting a couple of minutes or a couple of hours. Also, Hofstra just recently put out a paper that showed that they've been training this model for the last 5 years and have been able to say that they are 96% accurate in using a human plus AI to predict who will get into medical school. And they've cut person hours by thousands. So this is coming. All the other schools are picking up on this as well, and it's going to be really interesting to see where it goes. But that's not without some ethical and policy considerations. Now remember, I'm of the opinion that as far as educational institutions go, policy for using artificial intelligence from a student and a faculty perspective should be very minimal, because I want to see what people are going to do with it. I would much rather react to this wild thing that a student was able to create and be like, wow, I never even considered that, than to tightly put you in a box and say you can only use AI from 8:30 a.m. to 8:32 a.m. in the morning, and you can only ask it 3 questions. That's kind of the spectrum that we're looking at. So what does that policy look like? How do we create it? I think for patient side things, 100%, we need tons of policy that relates to this. Data protection is an absolute paramount piece, because today, data is like oil was back in the 1900s. This is the thing that's selling. And if you get a free app on your phone nowadays, you are the product. Your data is going into a huge repository to train something, I promise you. Even if Instagram does have those really great looking games on it, you know, that they're like, oh yeah, swipe left and right or jump over this thing, but they get me every time. So I know that I'm in multiple databases when it comes to those. We also need to protect patient privacy, like I mentioned. That data is important. We got to make sure that we watch out for it. We also got to figure out, is AI generated content plagiarism? So I know that from a copyright perspective, that's been settled in some places in that if I do the input and the AI puts something out, then I'm kind of safe. But most institutions haven't really sat down and decided, like, if a student uses an AI-generated image in a PowerPoint, is that okay? Who did they cite? You know, it's easy to cite Wikipedia, which you shouldn't do, but it's much more difficult to say ChatGPT, right? Next, we got to figure out bias. One thing about these AI models is another infallible piece of AI where like it's behind is that whatever data you put in is what it's going to use. So if you put in biased data, it's going to spit out biased results. We cannot extrapolate information from folks from Northwest Arkansas and Southwest Missouri to say that that's going to hold true for people in rural Pennsylvania. So we can't use the AI model for one and do it the AI model for another. That's not copacetic with one another. So I'd be remiss if I didn't do this and tell you that these are all things that are happening just down the road. Very excited about this. If you want to know, that's our building coming up, 154,000 square feet medical facility, pending accreditation, of course. Big asterisk on that one. I'm going to make sure this is not an attempt to recruit students, but is simply a way to inform you that things exist. So very pretty, very pretty, very pretty, a challenge. So here's what I'd like you all to do. Some of you had some hesitancy when you were trusting AI. I'm not asking you to go home and trust it. I'm asking you to go home and use it. If you already use it for something new. Just yesterday, I decided that I wanted to put in everything in my refrigerator and say, tell me all the things I can make with this, because my wife's out of town, I'm alone, and I don't want to eat Taco Bell again. And you know what? It gave me 5 recipes I could make right then and there with the stuff in my refrigerator. So college students, give that a shot. If you've got like ground beef, turkey, and a slice of cheese, I'm sure it could come up with something for you. If you're a user of it today, use it for something different. If you use it at work, try to use it to help you plan your grocery list. Because the more you use it, the more familiar you become, and the more okay you are with it making those decisions in the future, because whether you like it or not, it's coming, folks. I appreciate all your patience and your time, and I'm happy to take any questions y'all might have. Thank you all so much.
Okay, I think we have a few minutes to take a couple of questions. If you have a question, we'll bring the microphone to you. Question?
Yeah, you had touched a little bit on the language processing aspect of AI. How does that take into account different languages from different countries in the translation? Because I don't know if you guys have used Google Translate, but sometimes if you ask it something, the translation's a little off and then there's some misinterpretation. So how does that play into natural language processing?
Sure, so I think that's a great question, and it goes back to the information in, information out piece. Also bias as well. Like, unfortunately, a lot of the research that's occurring is occurring in primarily English-speaking countries, so it's being trained on English. So it's going to be able to spit that out. So if you put, German in for some reason, if you wanted to do that, then you have to hope that that model's been trained on German. Remember, when you train like natural language processing, it has to know what an A looks like. It has to know what a B looks like. It has to know where things are put, where they move, how they're used. And so how does it control for other languages? The hope is that folks of other languages will go into it. This is a recognized place where this is a shortcoming of it without a doubt. And unfortunately, because it's an English-dominated society, that's where it's at. I hope that it will move that way in the future, where we can think of, maybe some underdeveloped countries can have access to this, because I think it could be very useful for a litany of purposes. But we really just got to make sure that whatever we're training it with is what's coming out. So, until folks actually go in and train the algorithms with it, it's just not going to do a great job.
Thank you for that question. Another question?
I was just wondering, I guess what the goal is, or the idea around malpractice with AI. If a provider is using AI to determine treatment, and that the outcome is poor, is that coming back on the AI system processing or the provider themselves?
I think you just hit the nail on the head as far as why most physicians are very worried about using artificial intelligence and letting people know they're using it. You know, the thing about this is that, you know, there are apps out there right now, like an ambient listening app called Clarity. I think it's really cool in that a physician puts their schedule into it, they tap the person's name, they set their phone down in between them, and they just talk to them. I mean, how many times have we gone to the doc and they're behind the computer that is tethered to the wall on that swing arm thing, and they sit down and they're like, how are you? Oh, wow. And they just type the whole time. And you don't get any personal interaction. This Clarity app, you sit it in between. It is an ambient listening recording app that records everything that's said and actually writes summary notes for the physician. So no longer post-meeting a patient or post-consult do you have to write these notes. They come out in a very nice summary. All the way down to, if you decide to take your lisinopril from 10 milligrams to 5 milligrams, it will say, reduce this by 5 milligrams or 10 milligrams, whatever. So where does that fall in malpractice? Physicians are really terrified because they don't want everything to be recorded and put out there, because you're right. A patient could say, well, you used this word instead of that word, and you messed up, so now I'm gonna sue you. And I mean, rightly so, malpractice insurance is really expensive from physicians, so why would they want to introduce that to themselves? I think there's got to be policy generated for it. I'm unaware if any at all has been generated. I know that the way that they're probably getting around it now, and I'm just forecasting in my head, is the idea that physicians have to say yes to send that message, or they have to actually edit pieces of it before it'll go out. That's the way I think they're probably getting around it, but health systems is not my area. I think the people before me probably could have a pretty good answer to that one too.
Great question. So I think I'll take one more question because we're getting close to lunchtime. One more question.
So obviously there's going to be a lot of people, like patients, who are skeptical about AI. So how do we go about accommodating people who don't want AI used in their healthcare? Will they be kind of forced to eventually accept that that's going to be part of their healthcare, or is there going to be ways that we accommodate them when they don't want that incorporated?
I think at the beginning, it's most likely going to be a situation where folks accommodate. But, you know, back when electronic health records came out, you know, one of the things that a lot of physicians were very hesitant against was pushing notes to patients, or patients getting their lab results. You know, I mean, getting lab results that say, yes, this is definitely squamous cell carcinoma is kind of terrifying, but that's actually what it is today. I know somebody who's actually just diagnosed with that, and they got the news before their physician could tell them, because of the way that system is working. So physicians for a long time were very hesitant to say, yeah, we're okay with it. So there was a lot of pushback behind it. And eventually, I think it took legislation from like the federal government to say, you will use this and you will do this. And that's probably what it's gonna take ultimately for it to be widely accepted. Otherwise, yeah, you're right. There will be people who are like, nope, no robots for me. I want good old physician time, no worries. I probably will feel that way for a while as well until I can see some more results. How do you manage that? I think patients and physicians need to communicate really tightly together, and physicians need to be aware that not everybody's going to be okay with the things they do. You know, I'll make the statement that a good physician will be okay with it, and a physician who maybe needs some more continuing medical education credits probably won't be. And they'll say, well, it saves me time, no big deal. So I think folks are going to naturally also kind of select to physicians that meet their preferences. And that's how it is ultimately, until the point to where everybody's using it because there's too many positives not to say yes to it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.